Right, so that didn't take too long, did it? Starmer's government gets the Palestine Action ban kept in place, the Home Office gets the legal result it wanted, and almost immediately one of its own ministers decides the best use of anti-terror law is apparently to turn Twitter into a Home Office loyalty checkpoint. Well, this is more than a normal minister said something stupid on X story, though. The story is that Starmer's government fought to keep the Palestine Action ban, won the legal result it wanted, and then one of its own Home Office ministers, a certain Mike Tapp, publicly used that ban like a political trap against Zack Polanski. All very Joseph McCarthy stuff, as it happens. And when, amongst a large number of people on X called this out, including journalist Owen Jones, calling out the danger of Tapp's tapped tweet, Tapp didn't back down. He dug deeper. He answered with innuendo. And then, like a good little Labour friend of Israel, reached for the antisemitism card on top. Trying to get another politician to say something that would incriminate them, resorting to slurs when called out over that, and weaponizing anti-Semitism was the chef's kiss, wasn't it? Tapp went for the triple. But the guy doing the weaponizing is the Minister for Migration and Citizenship. He sits in the Home Office, publicly treating terror law like a toy for winning arguments online. And yet when interviewed not all that long ago, he had a very different idea about what made for good governance. And, well, if you're not familiar with Mike Tapp, this really does sum him up rather nicely.
It's important that we're transparent. I think a sign of good government and good leadership is not necessarily the mistakes you make, but it's owning them and it's acting on them. And this transparency and releasing all the documents will ensure and mean that we do never make these mistakes again. On your specific question... How on earth can you suggest
that Keir Starmer owns it, Minister? He said he, quotes, barely knew Jeffrey Epstein. He just needed to do a Google search. He must have known the nickname Scandalson and the Prince of Darkness, and this is a trained barrister. Give me a break.
It's public knowledge, isn't it, that Mandelson had that relationship with Epstein at the time of...
Well, it wasn't for Sir Keir Starmer. He believed him when, quotes, he barely knew Epstein. How gullible is your Prime Minister?
How well he knew him, I don't know, but what I do know is that
I wish I had a bridge to sell Sir Keir Starmer.
The relationship between Epstein and Mandelson was put to Mandelson during vetting. He lied, he weaseled, he tricked.
But Mr Tapp, the Prime Minister is a barrister. He will have been in court and been lied. His skills, presumably as a barrister and a DPP, are to see through that, Mr Tapp.
The Prime Minister wasn't the one conducting the vetting.
Nothing quite as slimy as a Labour minister defending his government over Mandelson and Epstein, but that wasn't the main takeaway here for me. Owning your mistakes is a sign of good governance, he said. Perhaps he should take some of his own advice, in which case. But before we get to Tapp digging himself a nice little ministerial trench here, remember what has just happened.
It is nonetheless a fundamental mistake to overlook the fact that Palestine Action overtly promotes unlawful violence amounting to terrorism. It is not, as it claims, a direct action civil disobedience protest group like the suffragettes operating transparently in the open. It is a covert organisation operating with secret cells to avoid the detection and prosecution of those using violence to destroy the property of third parties.
Palestine Action's proscription getting upheld at the Court of Appeal, although Lady Chief Justice Keir there could, I think, do with a bit of an education in the bombings and the arson committed by the suffragettes if she thinks red paint being chucked over some planes is somehow worse than targeting train stations and sporting arenas and the house of the Prime Minister of the day, and should reflect on the fact that she is only a Lady Chief Justice in all likelihood because of the actions taken back in the day, paving the way for equal rights for women. The fight on this front will, of course, continue. But this travesty of justice, of protests being curtailed under the abuse of the UK's far too broad definition of terrorism, of course elicited response of disgust. And as such, Green Party leader Zack Polanski wrote, "This government's branding of protests as terrorism has seen grandparents arrested and dragged through courts simply for holding up signs. It's deeply authoritarian when people are speaking out against a genocide and for a free Palestine." To which Mike Tapp magically appeared, a minister who seems to have far too much time on his hands as his presence on X appears to be constant, to ask him, "Do you support Palestine Action Group?" Now, perhaps that might come across as a bit of an innocuous question to you, but it comes with up to 14 years in prison attached to it now. Tapp didn't ask him, where do you draw the line between protest and criminal damage? He could have instead asked, how should the law deal with direct action? Not even the usual Labour blancmange about balancing rights and responsibilities. No, he went straight for the one question the government has just made legally dangerous to answer in the affirmative. The Starmer regime sold this as a public safety issue, and here is Tapp using it like bait. But Polanski, for his part, he didn't let it go, didn't fall into the trap either. He came back with this zinger. The fact that your government has made it illegal for me to answer yes is a damning testament to your flagrant disregard for civil liberties. This may be targeted at those taking action against the genocide, but it sets a very dangerous precedent that puts everyone at risk. And of course he's right. Where does it end? Tapp seems to think he's Joseph McCarthy embarking on a witch hunt against communists. It echoes those McCarthyite words of, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Something the former CBS presenter Ed. But it's also not as if Tapp had stumbled into all of this by accident either, because earlier the same day, before the Polanski incident had happened, he tweeted out, supporting Palestine tick, supporting Palestine Action, cross, don't support terrorists. Lovely little social media traffic like politics from the Home Office there. Nuance surgically removed, context chucked in a skip, civil liberties flattened into 3 lines and an emoji, because apparently that's what good governance now looks like when it's had too much Blue Labour Kool-Aid. Now, you can oppose Palestine Action, of course you can, it's your right. You can criticise direct action itself. You can argue about criminal damage and protest tactics and court rulings, all of that. Supposedly this is a free country where you're allowed to do these things, though increasingly less so it would appear. But the move Tapp is making is broader than that. He's policing the border between lawful Palestine support and criminalised Palestine support in public as a minister. And then he uses that border to bait the leader of the Green Party. Now, in response to Tapp's don't support terrorist tweet, Polanski had responded simply with a picture, the arrest of 83-year-old priest Sue Parfit. And all Tapp could come back with at that point was, tell me, Zack, what should somebody who is convicted of a terror-related offence look like? I'm intrigued. Well, Mike, usually when the public hears terror-related offence, they're not picturing pensioners with cardboard. They're not picturing people holding signs. They're not picturing court steps and placards and police officers dragging peaceful protesters in their 80s away. Now, you might see terrorists there, but that's not normal sunshine. And yet that's exactly why this question matters so much, because if the state gets to call this terrorism, the ministers get to use the word terrorism as a political weapon against literally anything. And once that happens, the argument's no longer about just Palestine Action, is it? It's about what kind of state Labour under Starmer is actually building here. That's what this looks like outside the courtroom, Mike, and outside your little Westminster bubble, which you're clearly insulated in like cotton wool. Not a Bond villain, not a terror cell, not an underground army of cardboard pensioners preparing to overthrow the realm with marker pens. People with signs, people sitting down, people being pulled into a terror law framing that your government created. And that's why Polanski's point matters so much here before Tapp even replied to it, because he was not saying ignore the law. He was saying look at what the law is doing. Look at who it is reaching. Look at the precedent it's setting. The state says terrorism, but we, the public, just see signs. Protest. The state says national security. The public sees grandparents being dragged through the courts or across the pavement by the police. The state says proportionality. The public sees ministers acting like the ban is a great big gotcha machine. And then along comes Tapp to prove every bit of criticism right in real time. So we have Polanski saying branding protest as terrorism is authoritarian, and Tapp replying with, do you support Palestine Action? It's not an answer to the argument. It's the very thing Polanski's warning about. It's like someone saying, I'm worried this floor is a trapdoor, and the minister responsible for trapdoors walks in, pulls the lever and says, interesting theory you've got there. But among the many, many responses to his McCarthyite tweet, the one that seemed to trigger Tapp the most was from Owen Jones. Jones had responded with a quote tweet reading, the more I think about this, the more shocking it gets. A government minister asked a political opponent a question, knowing that if he answered yes, he would be arrested and potentially imprisoned. That's thanks to his government's unhinged law. It is so disturbing. I completely agree with Jones, for a change. But Tapp didn't. And if he was digging a ministerial trench before, he was going for the abyss at this point, because he responded to that with, "I'm more disturbed that you spent the night thinking about me. The anti-Semitism I've woken to from the extreme left overnight is utterly unhinged, shameful and disturbing." Now, he could have taken Jones's tweet and used it to row back on his own extreme response to Polanski, but instead of taking Jones's tweet for a ladder, he took it for a shovel instead. The allegation is, you are a government minister using terror law to bait a political opponent, and his answer is, "I'm more disturbed that you spent the night thinking about me." Which is not exactly a rebuttal, and certainly isn't a clarification. It's not even good trolling, actually. It's the political equivalent of a boy in year 9 discovering innuendo and thinking he's invented comedy. Owen Jones is gay, that's not a secret, so when Tapp aims a "spent the night thinking about me" line at him, people are perfectly entitled to read that as homophobic. Not because they're hunting for offence with a microscope, but because that's exactly the kind of cheap sexualised sneer gay men have heard from smug little men like Tapp, trying to make themselves look clever for decades. And then, just to make sure the whole was properly reinforced, Tapp follows it with the usual emergency Labour smoke grenade. Anti-Semitism from the extreme left. I suppose he has to earn that honorary Vice Chair of Labour Friends of Israel title somehow, though. And of course that casts a whole other shadow across this, doesn't it? Because you don't get to accept an honorary role in a parliamentary organisation promoting the UK-Israel relationship and then scream anti-Semitism the moment people mention your politics during a row about Palestine protest law. That's not protection from racism, that's weaponizing it. But that dodge is all part of the mechanism. The trap is one half of it, the smear is the other. First, make the Palestine question legally dangerous, and then when people object to that, accuse them of extremism. And then when they mention your own public pro-Israel parliamentary affiliation, try to shove the whole thing under anti-Semitism, because that's what they always do. It's a racket with a ministerial pass. But surely to God this goes beyond that now. Mike Tapp is the Minister for Migration and Citizenship. That means borders, citizenship, nationality, immigration systems, state power over some of the most vulnerable people in this country. Decisions and frameworks that can wreck lives when handled badly, and this is the public judgment we're seeing from him. A terror law loyalty question, a cheap innuendo at a gay commentator, an anti-Semitism accusation when criticised for it, a public refusal to back down whatsoever. Why is he still in post, Keir Starmer? That's the only relevant question now, surely. Not whether he should delete the tweet, not whether he should have a quiet word with the whips, not whether some Labour comms officer should take his phone away and replace it with a Fisher-Price steering wheel, although that would be substantially safer, I fancy, and to be honest, it's the only thing I'd actually put this man in charge of. Why is he still in post? And ultimately, this story ends as no longer about just a Twitter spat between politicians and commentators. This is a ministerial standards story. It's a civil liberties story. It's a Palestine protest story. It's a Home Office story. It's a Starmer story. Because Starmer's government wanted this ban. Starmer's government fought for this ban. Starmer's government now owns what its ministers do with this ban and say it's about this ban. And Mike Tapp has shown everyone the danger in public. He took a law sold as national security and used it for a cheap political stunt. He took criticism of his actions and answered it with innuendo. He took scrutiny of his own conduct and tried to bury it under a smear. And he did all of that while sitting in the Home Office as Minister for Migration and Citizenship. So the question's not whether Mike Tapp thinks he's clever. I'm sure he very much does think he's clever. The question is whether Keir Starmer thinks this is acceptable. Because if a Home Office minister can publicly terror bait a political opponent, aim homophobic innuendo at a gay commentator, and then hide behind anti-Semitism the moment he gets challenged, and still be treated as a suitable person to hold power, then Labour's not just got a Mike Tapp problem. It's got a Home Office problem. It's got a civil liberties problem. It's got a Starmer problem. And until he's removed, the message from this government is painfully clear. We would rather lock you up than listen to you. For more on Labour's latest scandal, the handling of the Israeli illegal land sale that went on this past weekend, no sign of shutting that down like they can shut down Palestine Action protest. The Met Police now saying they're not going to bother to investigate it either. What a surprise. And we don't need 3 guesses for why that is with this lot, do we? So get more on that story here. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and help support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hope to catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.